Good morning, comrades. So I found it. I found the min-maxing my TTRPG build in another world, volumes 3 and 4 on audiobook. I'm using audiobook bay dot something something. Anyway, it's pretty good. You can find a lot of good stuff there as long as you know what to look for. And no viruses thus far, so doing pretty good. These versions even came with a freaking ebook if I wanted to like read the light novel, which I don't. I might pull them up though, because I'm trying to make pictures, obviously, for these things. You'll see them here, but it's kind of hard because the descriptions are a little vague when it comes to some of these characters. Like it'll simply be like, I have blonde hair and blue eyes, and Margit is a Spider Woman. What does that mean? She's a literal Spider Woman. Like her starting at like her belly up is like a lowly girl, but everything before that is all spider, abdomen, and such. So hot, yeah. I can see why you wanted to bang her and have a child. In one reality, I'm sticking with it for now. That these like weird outro, intro sections, maybe it's like some grand story arc, right? Where he's like, yeah, at some point he married Margit and had a kid, and then later on he became part of like the Fey Wild or whatever they call it in this world, the Alf system of governance. And then he turned into Fox Guy or Wolf Guy. But we start this, again, like the previous light novel, by just ignoring all that bullshit. Excuse me. Go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment. And yeah, here we go. Min-maxing my or it's just TRPG, which doesn't make sense because tabletop... It's 2 words, isn't it? Maybe it's not. Maybe it is TRPG. My TRPG build in another world. Okay, so Aerich, he starts off recalling the last several weeks because it's been like 3 months now since they started their travels, and they're finally reaching the capital city where the Mage College is. So his sister can train as a magus with Agrippina, who is the elf / not the Alf, the elf ELF. But they call them Methuselahs here. And then picking up the manga, just so I could get some better idea about the pictures, as I mentioned before, she is stacked. I don't think that's ever come up, but she's got a nice freaking rack. Like, you'll see it in the pictures for the last book if you watch the video instead of just listening to me ramble. But damn, girl, nice. Definitely got some of that mommy energy, if you know what I'm getting at. If you watch some of my other videos on the BitChute only, I like to keep everything else somewhat family friendly. But if you go to my BitChute page, or if you're watching it here, you'll notice on Thursdays I upload a little more risque content, if you will. Okay, so we get several little stories just kind of told. There's, after they kill the frost elf, Alf, he gets a crystal that Agrippina turns into like a ring that helps him with his magic. It helps like consume less mana when he casts spells, or helps him conserve it, or gives him more access to mana or something. Anyway, super nice. But now that he's like really attracted the what's it called? The attention of all the Alfs because of like Ursula and the Wind One and whatnot, he'll wake up a lot of mornings and like his hair will be braided, or like his horse's hair will be braided by Alfs, and he has to like undo it. And so that's always funny. Alyssa is really, his sister, is the changeling, is really waking up to her magic abilities. We got some more clarification. I don't know if I talked about this before with changelings, but in this world, changing is not like changeling the lost or changeling the dreamers or the dreaming or whatever, like a World of Darkness, which I would assume not most people, but more people who are like have heard the term changeling have probably heard it through the World of Darkness games, especially because of the popularity of certain video games that they release. But and then there's like the changeling where like the fairies like steal the baby out of the bed and like throw him in the river or whatever, take him back to their home, and then they replace it with like a straw doll or something. This one is that Alf becomes so enamored with the idea of being loved by humans that they create a child within a woman, and then go and like they create like the body, and then they like their whatever kind of substance Alf are made out of, these fairies, they go and like possess that body. So it's not that they're replacing anything. In fact, it goes at the end of the last book, it goes into great lengths to explain that the changelings a changeling isn't actually, there's not like a baby that's been replaced or a baby that's been lost or anything. It's simply that the fairy wants to be a part of a human family so bad that they like manifest it and then exist in that form. And then when they die, I don't know if they like return to fairyland or if that's like what they're doing. So Alyssa is straight up like a fairy, like another elf, but who just lives in like a mortal body, which makes her a changeling, which causes like all the weird issues with like a combination of like mortal and like fae existence. Anyway, not super important, but that's how that works here. So she's becoming much better. She's learning how to speak more. There's like a whole section in the beginnings of this volume where it talks about how Agrippina is keeping Aerich away from Alyssa a little bit more. Like she gets him a house like on another part of town and everything once they finally get to the capital. And that's really helping her develop her maturity because she's clearly like used her family as like a crutch to like not really grow up, to be dependent, especially Aerich, who treats her like a baby, so she acts like a baby, right? Like, oh, Oni-chan, and shit like that. So she's really starting to mature and become more of like, I don't want to say a woman, she's like 8, 9 maybe, I don't know. But she's becoming more like her age instead of being like so autistic, if you will. All right. And then the last little story we get is a reminder that Agrippina loves books, that she spends weeks at this like bazaar of books and just like buying books, like overvaluing books and buying them. That they go for like, they stop by a town here. Here there's like a book fair. Man, I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm so dry. And they stick around, and she buys so many books that these booksellers just keep coming back to sell her more books, and they're trying to find rare stuff, so which extends the stay even longer until Erich's like, we gotta go, bro. And she's like, all right, fine. So arriving at the capital, again, we get reminded that it's like a big city, but not the biggest city, and that there's a big castle, and that there's a like electoral government somewhat, where like, it's not like a pure democracy or even a republic or anything like that. It's an oligarchy, hands down, because the nobles get together every like so many years. I can't remember how long, 2 to 5 years or something like that. And they vote for like one of the nobles' houses to be like the king for like that many so one of the noble families, someone from one of the noble families to be like the king. And then everyone kind of just like counsels with the king, and then they'll like redo it. So it's kind of like an interesting form of like pseudo democratic / feudal government, but not democratic in the sense like people actually have a say. The important people have a say, which is, you know, exactly how our government works. So it's kind of like that. Only less corrupt somehow. Oh, so corrupt. But here it's pretty good. Everyone's having a good time. The oligarchs actually seem to care about their people, and unlike in reality, so you know, makes you kind of sad being like, oh, that'd be nice. I can see why people look at feudal societies and be like, well, you know, the kings, a lot of them took much better care of their people than current with the technology we have. So it's kind of embarrassing. You're getting shown up by like monarchs from like the 500s and emperors from like before Christ was born and caliphs and stuff. Caliphs really a lot more took care of their people until they got like real decadent, started having sex with animals and stuff. Anyway, story for another day. And then Alyssa's like super excited. She's like, oh, do we get to live in the castle? And Erich's like, oh no, we're going to be in the magic college. And Agrippina's like, cough, cough. The magic college is in the castle, so yes, you're going to live in the castle. Yay! They get to live in the castle. But not Aerich. So, as I mentioned, he gets put in a home. We'll get to that in a minute, though. So they enter the magic college, and Agrippina's acting kind of funny. And then she goes to like sign in or whatever, and then like this burst of wind like blows the paperwork away. And then guess who shows up? It's her master. Her master, Big Boobs McGee. I'm trying to remember what her name is. It's something very simple. Did I write it down in my notes? I did not, but I'm sure I'll bring it up at a later time. Not just mentioned. Okay. Anyway, so we find out the Magic College is like a Harry Potter style system. It's more mature and more advanced, as in like, it's not just like a place, it's not Hogwarts, right? It's like a mixture between the Ministry of Magic and Hogwarts, but all the students who are being trained need to have like a master, like a magia. And then, you know, Aerich goes off a little bit more, kind of redefining that like anybody can be like a mage. Like if you have magic potential and you kind of figure it out, like the guy they killed who was trying to kidnap Alyssa in the first book, they would call him a mage. But to be a magia, you have to go through like the schooling system essentially, and you have to pay for it, and you have to be like cleared and signed in and all that shit. So that's fun. So that's what Alyssa's being trained to be a magia by Agrippina. And then when the master comes, she's like the McGonagall of like their particular house, which their house is very much about open magic and like sharing magic with the world and just letting everybody have access to as much as possible to like better mankind or whatever. She comes flying in, and she's a wraith. So what's a wraith, you may ask? If you're familiar with Dungeons & Dragons or World of Darkness or video games on some level, you would think, oh, that's like an undead monster. And you would be half correct. It is undead in this world. But unlike the monstrous form that they take in other places, ghouls and wraith are actually they're magical beings that have some remaining ability to be a conscientious person and use magic and stuff. So it's kind of more like Konosuba Wiz, where she's like a lich, but she's a beautiful, boobacious woman. This master is exactly the same. Like it's mentioned that she's voluptuous several times. She's also a perv and loves like children. Yep. Now, how sexual does it get? It doesn't, but she's still a perv, and she just wants to be around youth. I'm trying to remember the exact term the author uses. It's like a vitality pervert or something, where it's like she just appreciates the vitality of youth and wants it around and gets like kind of turned on by having like, these beautiful young people around. Granted, Aerich in this world is considered almost an adult at the age of 14, I think is what he's at. Because I don't think he's officially an adult. I don't think he's hit like 15 yet, where you're officially an adult. So he's technically he's like a teenager, so it's not as bad, but Alyssa's got to be like no older than 10, I gotta say, from what I recall. Anyway, so her and Agrippina go at it for a minute, and then the voluptuous master notices the children, because that's what they are, and she like hugs them and like pushes Erich's face into her giant breasts. Oh, so she's like Wiz, right? If you look up Wiz from Konosuba, she's like a beautiful woman. She's just undead and lives forever. And so to create a ghoul, what happens is when someone's about to die, if they pool all their magical energy, whether they conscientiously or non-unconsciously, then it explodes and they become a ghoul. And ghouls are super powerful, and they can tend to like cause a lot of problems in the area. So they have to be, usually they're hunted down and killed because they're like wrathful. But then a wraith is like that, but it's a mage or a magia that does it. So it's literally like a lich. It's someone who expends like all their magic, all their mana, or to like create a burst of magical energy, and then makes them like immortal, along with, they makes them so they can like live forever because they're undead, and then have like extra abilities and stuff. So it's exactly like becoming a lich in like a Dungeons & Dragons / Pathfinder kind of world. And so that's what she is. But again, she's sexy and definitely got that like MILF situation going. So if you're into that, here you go. Got your wish. We had lowly spiders, and now we got MILF undead. just like Wiz from Konosuba. It's literally the same thing. Slightly different. Wiz is calm and demure, and this woman is hot for young flesh. All right. So very Japanese anime in that regard. So she really wants Aerich or Alyssa to be her like apprentice, or to come serve her, but Agrippina gets like she really manipulates the whole situation. She's very cunning diplomatically, and she essentially gets herself like a 3-year paid vacation in the capital, where she can just like study and do research and read books, while also training Alyssa without having to go to classes or present anything or write papers or any of that shit. And in return, the voluptuous master gets Aerich like a few times a week to like dress up and to be a perv over, and also Alyssa occasionally as well. And so she's like, done, I love it. And so that's what happens. So Alyssa and Aerich get taken by the master to be dressed up like dolls at this like exceedingly fancy clothing store. And like this woman's like, she's extremely rich. She's the head of this house. She's been alive for like 200 years. So she's just like throwing money at this thing. Like Aerich was saying something about how like one of these like suits of clothing is like more money than his family makes like an entire year, by like double or something crazy. And he's just like, oh my gosh. But then he's like kind of creeped out by the whole situation. But at the same time, she's like an extremely great teacher and researcher, and she's gonna give, as part of this whole deal, she's gonna give him access to the libraries, which he wouldn't otherwise have, especially like the secret sections of the library, or like the the real good stuff is, along with she's going to come and teach him periodically, because he's not actually being trained to be a magia, but she'll train him because she wants to spend time with him, because she's a perv. And then also he can get access to like the magic job board. So the magic job board is a thing that gets explained at this point as this kind of like guild job board from like any other like JRPG or, you know, various fantasy animes and whatnot, that magic, like the students can go and like access to get like pay, so they can do they can get money to pay off the school, because remember, the school's very expensive, and a lot of people don't necessarily have money. So those who do, like the nobles who come in to become magia and whatnot, they don't need to use the job board. But if someone does want to use the job board, it's open. And then oftentimes you get like rich parishioners, like elder magi, who just like throwing kids bones. They'll just have like I request the presence of a mage at a tea party at my house, 5 gold or whatever, right? So it's like, oh cool, I just gotta go hang out and like learn something, and then I get paid. So that's nice. Aerich doesn't get access to that shit though. He can take like the lower end of the jobs, and he has to wait for all the magic students to get the jobs first, and then he can like pick up whatever scraps are left. But he does have permission, even though he's not officially part of the school, which is nice, because it'll help him pay off his sister's debt faster, which he's still pretty concerned about. So at this point, Aerich meets this guy, Mika, who might be a girl, question mark? Like, he questions it, but, like, doesn't ask. And then he keeps referring to her/him as him and being like, oh, my friend. But then he does bring it up a couple times. He says, like, if I just met this person on the street in a dress, I would assume it was a woman, because his face is so pretty. So that makes me question if, like, maybe Mika is a girl, because he only sees her/him. I'm going to go with him. He only sees Mika, him, as, wearing like robes and stuff, because he's a magical student. And we so they meet and they kind of hit it off, and then we just get like a few weeks go by, and Erich's like doing his thing. He's like showing up, helping Agrippina out, checking on his sister. Sister's making like huge strides. She can now like fly and like teleport and use space magic and all sorts of crazy shit. And then Agrippina's like, there's not enough room in my like study, and I want to keep your sister here to like, keep the whole thing of it, to like keep her away from him a little bit. She doesn't say this outright, but it kind of implied that she's like, she needs space so that she can grow the fuck up. So she buys him a house on the other side of town, and it's a super big, nice house. The problem with it is that it's haunted, and so people keep getting driven out because there's a sylph, and the sylph is not like an elf/fairy, and it's also not like a ghost. It's like a middle ground between the two. But because Aerich, all the fae creatures love Aerich because of his blonde hair, blue eyes, and his like calm demeanor and his niceness to like all fae creatures, she loves him. So she makes him breakfast and like cleans the house. It's like his little like servant essentially. So he's loving life. He's got the sweet house, and then he goes, checks on his sister, and he gets like food from his master, who apparently they have DoorDash in this universe, like medieval DoorDash, for these like exceedingly rich, lazy mages, where they like just order food using magic, and then the food like gets delivered, and then she doesn't eat a lot because she doesn't need to eat, because Methuselah don't really need to eat; they just eat for like funsies. So she's always like ordering all this food and then not touching it, and then Elisa and Aerich get to eat it all. So Aerich gathers it up to go on like a picnic with his friend, his not girlfriend, boyfriend friend, who is Mika. And so they meet up at the job board, and they pick a job picking herbs, because Erich's very good at picking herbs. He put a lot of points in botany, I guess. And Mika wants to learn. So they go out and they find herbs, and then they're having like a cute little picnic and just talking about life and shit. And then at this point, Mika explains all the different houses. So there's the house that of his sister that is like open about magic. Then Mika's house is actually very secretive about magic, and they're like rival houses. Then there's like a necromancy house. There's like a cult house, which I think is different than necromancy house. I kind of zoned out there for a second when he was just rattling on. It was a long section talking about the different houses. There's like a light house and a dark house. It's almost like a gacha game. There's like 4 main houses, and then the special houses like the heretics and the pilgrims, if you're using Nikkei logic. Or light and dark, a lot of these gacha games. And so that's good to know. There's just like these the houses have like some sort of rivalry and sometimes partnerships, and there's nothing like too crazy, but that's how they all work. Yeah. So Aerich and Mika continue to chit chat about some old bullshit, these houses and whatnot, and there's like, I think they talk about like I got something in my and magia politics and everything. And then he gets a letter from the Wraith saying, "Oh, it's time to do my thing." And then we get like another weird comment where they're like getting on a horse to ride back. And then Aerich mentions that Mika's hips are way too thin to be a girl's. And it's like, neither of you have really gone through puberty completely yet. So even if she is a girl, which we found out he's not. It's not. We'll get to there. But it's like, you keep talking about this, and it's like, you guys are like 13 and 12. Like, 12-year-old girls don't have hips. They just, fuck. Anyway, so then he goes off on this huge tirade about the Japanese obsession with bathing and bathhouses and all this bullshit. And there's tons of bathhouses, and this kingdom is just like a Japanese knockoff fantasy world where like bathhouses are everywhere, and they're free, and some are more expensive and they're more extravagant. And bathhouses. And he invites Mika to come to a bathhouse, and she, whatever, is like, nah, I'm good. I'm gonna go do my own thing. Adios. And he's like, all right, cool. So then he goes in bathhouse for a while, and he starts checking out his stats and thinking about all the fun fucking stuff he could do with all his new stats and his making mana store and all this stuff. And then we also learn at this point that he's growing his hair out because for some reason having long hair makes it easier to store mana or to utilize mana or whatever, particularly in women. So that's why all like Agrippina is at this point, and then the Wraith are mentioned as having like exceedingly long hair to like be an annoyance, and they just have it like tied up real high or whatever, because so that way they can have like better mana storage or whatever. Eventually he gets interrupted while thinking about all this bullshit by Ursula, who's, hey, I want to give you immunity for 100 years of dancing in the Fey realm. And he's like, nah, bro, I'm not going to do that. That's way too much to ask for. And she's like, I got another gift for you. And he's like, sure. And he's like, hey, it got really dark in here. And she's like, yeah, dummy, it's nighttime. And he's like, oh, fuck. And so he runs off because he was supposed to be with Agrippina cleaning up and doing all his like chores that he's supposed to do. So while he's there, we go through Agrippina's point of view, and she thinks about how interesting Aerich is and how strong he is in magic and mind, and how she can really train him up to be very impressive if she really wants. A few days go by, and he's up at the library with the Wraith, and he's dressed up with his like super asexual, sexy like outfit, and the librarian's like, ooh, you look so cute. Ooh. But the Wraith starts teaching him about combat because he really wants to know about combat. And she has this whole comment. It's like, do you want to know about fighting with magic, or do you want to be able to fight like a magia? Because those are different. And he's like, why don't the number 2? And so he and as they're talking about all this stuff, he realizes that this magic guild that his sister and Agrippina are in, and the Wraith, they're min-maxers. They're just like him. They're like the min-maxing guild, if you will. So then the Wraith puts him in like a VR magic headset or whatever. Not a headset, actually, but he has like this dream where he's fighting, and he's watching this guy, like, he's fighting as a magia, and he's defeating like swarms of demon rats or whatever. And he learns that this magia combat, it's like very refined, and how the tactics work and all this stuff. And he's like, oh, I want to invest my AXP into that so I can like fight just like him, so I can utilize my magic to be most efficient, but also being an incredible fighter that can like nuke AoE and then do strong single fire attacks or whatever. And so they have a conversation about that afterwards. After he's leaving the library and heading home, he gets a letter from Agrippina, and she's like, here's a gift. Here's space magic. This is how it works. And so he's able to study this like chart or whatever she sends him so that he can create pockets in space and for storage or transportation or whatever. And this is something that Agrippina and Alicia have been able to use a lot up to this point, but now he has access to it as well. So it unlocks that portion, and he does invest some some of his experience points into that. Time passes, and we get to like kind of the last little arc in this book, and it starts off with like this. We take the perspective of these bandits, and they're talking about how great it is. It's like the fall harvest season, so you have these people trying to travel around and sell their goods, and they're just like murking them, and they're killing. Some of these caravans don't have enough guards, and we got this whole big bandit group of like 30 people, and how they're like living high on the hog and all this stuff, and they're super excited. And then someone's like, "Oh, hey, there's a couple kids on horses. Let's go fuck them up and steal these horses. These horses could be worth a lot because they're like big, strong war horses or whatever." Because they're Agrippina's horses, right? So they're like super, super expensive, fancy, and she's like doesn't know what to do with them, so Aerich rides them around. So as they're getting ready to like ambush, these two children riding the horses start beating the shit out of everybody, and they beat the shit out of everybody. And then at some point during this like ridiculous battle, they defeat like everybody, this whole group. And then we learn that there's like a secondary group, like the actual leader of the bandit group and his guys, and they're like, what the fuck's going on over there? And then they get attacked. And then at some point, after they all get the shit kicked out of them too, we take over Erich's perspective, and he's like, oh yeah, that was great that we used like your familiar, and we learned that Mika has a familiar, like a little owl thing that, can do like fantasy Dungeons & Dragons Pathfinder level, kind of like checking stuff out, minimal communication, hold spells, all that shit. And that his guild, that's a particular thing, like having a familiar, and that most magia don't, because it's kind of like a waste of resources and it's like unnecessary, but like, Mika likes it because it's like, it's so cutesies. So let's see. Okay, yeah. So they're kind of cleaning up, and we found out that they didn't kill any of the bandits. They just like incapacitated them, like Eric or Mika used some of its magic to like sink them into the ground, and Aerich would like clip their, did like the clipping their ankles or whatever, so they couldn't get up, or like cutting into their wrists and like really fucking them up. But like they're not dead, so they can make more money off turning them in and all that stuff. And then at some point, one of the bandits wasn't like completely disarmed, and so they fired a crossbow bolt at Mika. But this is where we learn that Aerich has his like space magic stuff, because he uses the space magic and his like quick timing and his like god levels of dexterity to like deflect the bolt out of the way, and then they like take care of that guy. We then get a guard's perspective, and he's like being summoned by this familiar, and he's like, oh yeah, this happens all the time. With Magia, we'll be wandering around and like find something or take care of some bandits or see some shit, and they'll come summon like the guard. And so the guard rolls up and sees like 32, I think, bandits all like, wrapped up, ready to go. And he's like, the fuck? And they're like, hey, so we took care of this. Can you take care of the rest? We got like a mission we got to keep going on. And he's like, sure, here's some money, thanks. At this point, as they continue to travel, we learn that Agrippina sent Aerich to find a certain book from this guy who used to like make copies of all like this great scribe who got like fed up with like the whole Magia school and was like, fuck this place, I'm out, and like noped out of that whole situation. But that he lives in this like village over there, and she doesn't have like the time, like she cannot get this book from this guy because they kind of are on the outs, if you will, because of her demands and her just being like kind of a retrobate to some extent. And so Aerich heads over there, and she gives him like tons of money to do it, and so he invites Mika to come along so they can go on like their little quest together. They get to the town, and Aerich wants to take a bath like immediately, and Mika's like, oh, I'm gonna go check in at the inn and chill, see ya. And so he's in the bath and he's chilling, and then this old man comes in. It's just the two of them, so they start chit-chatting, and then he realizes that this guy's a treant, because he's like made of wood, and that the treant, and he's like, oh, I love coming to the baths because like I don't absorb water or store water as much as I used to, so it lets me like really soak it in, because the hot water like really soaks into my bark and makes me feel great. And it's like, wait, you're a treant in this town? You must be the guy I'm looking for, blah blah blah. And he's like, yep, that's me. And so he's like, oh, I got a quest to get like a book from you. And he's like, all right, let's finish up this and we go back to my workshop or whatever. So they go and talk about this book, and we learn about like dead gods or gods who have been removed, and then the wars of the gods and some old bullshit like world building stuff, which is pretty good. It's not bad. It's just kind of like, there's a lot of stuff in these books. My biggest complaint, as a side note at this point, with these books is like stuff gets brought up. Like there was that whole section in the first book I still can't get over, with like the ogre lady's point of view when he like broke the helmet to get the thing for his sister for the pearl or whatever, and that pearl thing never came up again either. And it's a lot of stuff like that where it's like there's like interesting stuff going on, or there's like this whole section based on like the ogre's perspective and like ogre life and all this stuff, and then it never comes up again. Like nothing about ogres, nothing about the kiss, nothing about like her tribe or anything, and like maybe it'll come up in like the far-flung future. But as a there's a fucking cop or something. Where is that coming from? Anyway, but it's like I'm almost like done with this third book. Like this thing wraps up pretty quick. So we're almost in the fourth book, and this thing was like beginning of the first book, and it's like never come up again. And it's like, okay, well maybe it'll come up in the future, I guess. I mean, it's just kind of like, it's poor writing. Like everything that is like super important that's like specified in like the early like a book should at least be like addressed again at some point in that book. Otherwise, there's no reason to like bring it up then, because by the time it comes up later, like if you're just doing world building, like this whole section here with these gods is like, that's such interesting stuff to know, and it's fine that it's like brought up here and then nothing comes of it, because it's like you're just like introducing concepts to how the world functions and whatnot. So it's like it helps just build like my understanding, or Erich's understanding of how the general world, because he's like a child and he grew up in like a small country town, right? So how magia work, or how the magic system works, or how these gods are like systems of power and like politics and stuff. That's fine. That stuff comes up and it isn't like super relevant right away, but it should at least be like somewhat relevant, especially if like there's a lot of time. It's not just like people chatting about something and then it like comes up, or like reading something. It's like, oh, I didn't notice that this, and they're like, oh yeah, something, and it's like, okay, I understand this is a light novel and there's gonna be like 16 volumes of this shit, but to have like this, it'll like focus on characters and then like completely ignore them, or like have whole things go on and then they're like virtually irrelevant later on. Like the Wind Fairy hasn't come up since, like in this whole book, like a single time, and it's like, I don't understand. Anyway, so anyway, he says he can buy the book. Aerich can buy the book for like 25 gold pieces, which if you remember from my previous review of the second book, 10 gold pieces is like what a farm earns like a year, and that's not like profit. That's like everything. That includes like when they're taking money away for cost of everything. Like it's not like they end up with 10 gold. It's like it's like gross, not the net. And so it would take like 2.5 years of not spending anything on that farm and saving every penny to like pay for this book. And it's like, that is so mind blowing to this guy, because it would really take like forever to get 25 gold pieces saved up, if that's really what you're going for. Which is part of the reason why he had to come with his sister and like be a bounty hunter essentially and work at these guilds and trying to do all this extra chores so that he can pay off his sister's debt, because she's accruing like 15 gold pieces a year, which is like excessive. Anyway, but he says, or you can go get me this like journal from this like area over here. And he's like, yeah, I'll do that. And so there it goes to go to bed. And then he gets up in the middle of the night and he had a wet dream. Like literally, he's like, oh, did I pee myself? And he has a whole like this weird section about how he like had a hard time potty training or like urinalysis or whatever. But no, he's like, oh no, I'm like entering puberty at this point, right? And this is why I made that comment earlier about like, because like if he is a girl, he's like 12 or 13. He hasn't reached like maturity yet, which he hasn't. So like, why would he have hips? Because that happens after. That's like a secondary sexual trait. Anyway, to prepare for like childbearing, right? Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes. I was like thinking about that whole situation. Okay. So he's like, oh man, I gotta clean up. So he heads to like the bath at the inn or whatever, and then he sees Mika naked. Mika's not a boy or a girl. She's asexual, or he's asexual. Because, dun dun dun, she's like an angel or something. I think they call them something else. But at some point he's like, you're an angel. And he's like, oh no. And then we get this whole thing from Mika telling, like, he's so embarrassed that he doesn't want to say anything to Aerich because Erich's like his friend. And he doesn't have a lot of friends because human, or mensch, or whatever they call this, like hate, are wary of like this race because they like change genders periodically. Like they'll just like randomly change genders or be neutral gender, and that, you know, they come from like the north and they came down from like the mountains because they needed to like, I don't know, it was too harsh up there, and so they joined this kingdom, but then people still don't kind of trust them or whatever. And then Erich's like, no, we're cool, bro. And then the book starts doing this super annoying thing, and it's like the same thing from the first book where it's like, Mr. Brother, and it's like, that's not what they fucking said. Like, Oni-chan is not Mr. Brother, it's like Big Brother. That's all it fucking is, you dumb fucking localizer / translator. And so I start doing this weird thing where it's like, hey, old chap, or old friend, or like constantly. And it's not just like it happens once or twice. It's like, it's annoying. Like every time they talk to each other, it's like, right, old pal, right, old chum, bullshit. And it's like, oh, stop doing that. It's super annoying. Like, it's one of those weird things where it's like, I know this is not how the author did not write that every fucking time. Like, that's like some weird translation / localization bullshit. Anyway, so once they're cool and they start being really annoying with each other, they decide they're gonna go and work together to get this thing. And so they head, and it's like cold and wintry, and they fight some undead, and then they get to this lodge and they rest there for a little bit, and then eventually they find this like dungeon, and it's like, it's a good old fashioned like Dungeons and Dragons first edition, or advanced first edition. It's like second edition, or advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition. Yes, that's what it is. So it's Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is like is actually like a third edition, because it's Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and Advanced Dungeons second edition. Okay, there we go. So it's like that level where it's like this. It's just like a dungeon. Like, go in the dungeon. There's like trap room. There's like puzzle room. Then there's monster fight room, and all the monsters are just undead zombies. They just keep being zombies. So they go through and they do several puzzles. We don't spend that much time with it at all. We don't like sit there and like contemplate riddles and how they're solving puzzles. It gets like hand wavedy kind of a way. And there's several battle scenes, which this guy writes combat pretty well, and how that's going. So they get through, and they finally get to the final boss room, and there's like a rest area right outside, just like a Japanese role-playing game. It's like, oh, we should rest, even though because we're so tapped out in like magic and stamina and stuff. So they take a little nampsy poo and like drink some water and have some. I don't think they actually eat anything, but they kind of rested up, and they're like, all right, let's go. And so they head inside, and there's 7 zombies. And so Aerich immediately tosses Mika aside and starts fighting all these guys, and they get them all down till there's just like the one big boss there, and he's got like a cursed sword or whatever, which Aerich identifies. And they fight, and then Erich's about to get killed before Mika gives him like one final like chance by using like his magic, and then he passes out from like exhaustion from like using all his magic, and then Erich's able to defeat the monster, and then he passes out. And then when they wake up, or no, before he passes out, the cursed sword like comes alive and tries to fling itself at Aerich for him to take possession, and he's like, no, fuck that, I've played too many role-playing games where you get cursed swords and it causes problems. So he sends the sword out into like the interdimensional space with like his like space magic that he has, and then he passes out. And they both wake up, and they're just in like a cabin, right? A cabin in the woods. And they're like, oh, this must be, and the whole thing's called like an Ichor dungeon. So these Ichor dungeons are where there's like a high level of like concentrated evil magic, right? It's the same thing that turns regular kind of beastmen creatures like goblins and rat people and whatnot and ogres into demons or devils or whatever they call them in this. It's that ichor. It's like that the dark leftovers of the magic or just sludgy concentrations or whatever. And so, so once they defeated like the source of that, which I guess was this main boss, the big boss, then it turned back into a cabin. So then he's able to create like a sling load or whatever, drag Mika back to the town. And so then we have a whole conversation about how like treating people with like mana exhaustion is different than just treating people because it's like a core fundamental, you know, it's like you kind of tap yourself out almost of your ability to do magic, which is like a core of life functioning because everything has mana or whatnot. And then it's really expensive to find like a healer to take care of that. And a lot of healers are kind of like, I don't want to waste my time with this bullshit. I'm not even going to see you because it's like yada, yada, yada. So then he goes and reports back to the treant and he's like, oh, don't worry. You guys did a great job. Thanks for reporting that in. I got a healer friend here. He'll take care of Mika. Don't worry about it. And then Eric's like, cool, I'm going to go sharpen my blade or some bullshit. And he's then he's like, I can't get up. And the guy's like, oh, no. You're going to take care of yourself too. I'm not going to have it any other way. So he like casts a spell and knocks Eric out. So then they both can like spend some time in the resting tent, healing up and like getting better before they head back to Agrippina to turn in the quest. It's at this point that Mika wakes up and is like in bed, and it has now become like officially a girl, of course. Because now he's got breasts and and like the vagina access, and he's like, oh wow, my parents always told me that like either I'd fall in love or it would be based on some trauma. So I guess me almost dying was traumatic enough for me to turn into a woman. That's cool. It's unfortunate because now me and Eric can't be like best friends anymore, or maybe we can. Maybe I'll just hide it some more, and that way he doesn't have to find out that I'm a girl or whatever. Even though I have like a high pitched voice now and everything, like it's like instant maturity overnight. And she's like enjoying herself thinking about stuff, and then that's like the end of the main book. Okay, and then this book in like the epilogue section finally clarifies kind of what I've been guessing, and I think I talked about this in the previous book, where it seems like these like epilogue chapters are just like in the first one it just seems like, oh, that's a future, but then it's like that's not the future. And the second one it was more like, are these like alternative history futures? Is this something we're going to get to eventually or not get to? Right? The thought had occurred to me, whether I talked about it in that review or not, that these might be like alternative history kind of ideas or different dimensions or whatever. But in this book, it states it like at the very beginning. It's like, hey, in another version where the history was a little different, this is what occurred. And in this alternative history, we start off with a girl in the Magic Academy looking for a master who has left a note being like, I'm going off on an adventure. And she's like, God damn it, all the time, fuck. And so she runs off to find out what's going on and track him down. So we find out in this world that Mika and Eric and Alyssa all became professors at the Magic Academy, and that Eric's known as the Vagabond Professor because he's always going on adventures, and he's just pretty much focused on finding like strange creatures and phenomenons and fighting. And at one point, some kingdom nearby the Empire like threatens the Empire, and he goes out there and single-handedly like lasses the whole place. And so he's not well liked, but he's very high up in the hierarchy, and then he's a headache for Agrippina to this day. Meanwhile, he's got he found this girl who was like a noble, but she was kind of abused by her parents, not like more neglected than abused, but she has a lot of magical power, and I think she's a changeling the way it's described in the book, even though it doesn't name that directly. But he found her, and then now she's the apprentice, right? Mika just does whatever. She changes from male to female whenever she feels like it, and she kind of abuses her friend. There's something romantic there with Eric, but she doesn't like people flirting with her, so she'll do whatever. Eric went back and proposed to Margette at some point, and she was like, "Nah, I don't want to be married to a nobleman." And he's like, "Oh, I guess I am a nobleman now that I'm like a professor at the Magic Academy." He's making a lot of money. It was like $1,500 a year. I'm sorry, 1,500 drachma, which if you remember, I've repeated this multiple times in this, I feel. It's like 15 drachma a year to pay for the student, and then 10 drachma a year is how much like an average farmer makes in a year. So he's making like 150 times what like a regular farmer would make. So if a farmer in like America is making $50,000 a year, he's making 150 times that, which it's a lot. It's like $1 million a year. Anyway, so he's gallivanting about, fighting people, discovering things, just having the time of his life. In this story, he like sneaks off because the Wraith lady wants him to do something crazy, and he's like, I've had enough of this. And so he goes to the hot springs, and he brings Margette and Mika, who are kind of like frenemies. And then he also invites his pupil in this. So and then his whole family. And so it just seems like a very nice, pleasant ending, just kind of like the first one. The second one is kind of crazier from the second book, but this seems like a nice, happy ending for him that didn't happen, I guess, in the main line. But there you go. So that's book 3. We're going to get started on book 4, but that's Min-Maxing in a TTRPG Volume 3. Hope you had fun, as much fun as I did. So go ahead, like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I will catch you all later.